What's the best fuel for your car? Does higher octane mean more energy or more power? If you put premium gas to a car that requires regular gas, will it improve your engine performance or gas mileage? Hop in and we'll get going. In the U.S., unleaded gasoline usually comes in 3 grades. Normally we have 87 for basic or regular, 89 for plus or mid-grade, and 93 for premium. But what is octane rating and what does it mean? Octane rating refers to how resistant a fuel is to combustion by pressure. The higher the octane rating, the more compression the fuel can withstand before it ignites. Higher octane fuels are often required or recommended for engines that use a higher compression ratio and or use supercharging or turbocharging to force more air into the engine. Increasing pressure in the cylinder allows an engine to extract more mechanical energy from a given air-fuel mixture, but requires higher octane fuel to keep the mixture from pre-detonating. Octane rating does not relate directly to the power output. It has nothing to do with the energy contained per liter or per kilogram of fuel. Fuels with a higher octane rating are used in higher compression engines that potentially yield higher power, but such higher power comes from higher compression of the engine, not necessarily from the gasoline. Do you know why the octane numbers at gas stations in the U.S. differ from those in Europe? Europe has 95 and 99. Does this mean that Europe uses higher octane? No, because in the U.S., gas stations use pump octane number or PON, but Europe uses RON, which means research octane number. It's just a matter of definition. So the American 89 octane, or mid-grade, is the same as the European 95 octane, and the American 93, or premium grade, is the same or similar to the European 99. In 1921, an English engineer, Harry Ricardo, discovered that the more iso-octane in the fuel, the more resistance it was to detonation. He developed a scale to measure detonation resistance. Gasoline made up of 100% iso-octane was given an octane rating of 100. Harry's work ultimately led to the general use of octane ratings. There are a lot of myths about octane, so answer true or false. The different octane levels means different energy content. Different octanes burn fuel hotter or colder or faster or slower. Different octanes burn fuel cleaner and more fully. If you answered yes to any of these myths, then unfortunately you were wrong, because 1, the different octane levels all contain the same energy content. 2, they also all burn the same temperature at the same speed. 3, a clean or complete fuel burn depends not on the octane, but mainly on the air-to-fuel ratio in your car's combustion chamber. So let's break it down. What happens if your car requires high-octane gas, but you fill it with low-octane instead? Nowadays, modern cars have electronic control units, ECUs, that can adjust engine timing and performance to operate even with lower-octane fuel. So your car will drive, but engine power and fuel economy will still suffer. Frequent use of fuel with octane lower than what your car needs can lead to poor engine performance and eventually damage both the engine and the emission control system. Here's why. Ignore the ECU for a minute. In general, using lower octane gas in a high octane gas car means that under high pressure, gasoline will ignite spontaneously and earlier than it should. And what is called detonation, that is thermal shock, will occur. This is a spontaneous, uncontrolled ignition of fuel in the engine. Detonation leads to a sharp rise in temperature and even to a possible explosion. Will your engine survive the detonation? And how do you know if or when it's happening? Simple. You hear a knock sound from the engine when a detonation occurs. This knock is created by pressure waves that occur during the rapid combustion of the mixture and get reflected from the walls of the cylinder and piston. This reduces the engine power and accelerates the wear inside. So if detonation waves occur, the engine can be damaged or destroyed. That's how gasoline with a lower octane rating can damage the engine pistons if you regularly use it in a car that requires high octane. What about the opposite scenario? Let's say your car maker requires regular unleaded gas, but you upgrade with mid-grade or premium. Will this affect fuel economy or engine performance? It depends on your driving conditions. For example, in most cars, higher octane fuel can improve performance and gas mileage, and it can also reduce carbon dioxide, CO2, emissions during during severe duty operation, like if you're towing a trailer or carrying a heavy load, especially in hot weather. But under normal driving conditions, you'll probably get little to no benefit in fuel economy or engine performance. In that scenario, you have to ask yourself, why pay more for premium gas? So, is there a difference between what your car maker requires versus what they recommend? Yes, there is a difference. In general, if your vehicle requires mid-grade or premium fuel, then higher octane fuel is worth the extra cost. If your owner's manual says your car doesn't require premium fuel, but says that your vehicle will run better on higher octane fuel, in other words, it's recommended but not required, well, then it's really up to you. The cost increase is typically higher than the fuel savings. But some drivers value lower CO2 emissions and lower petroleum usage by even a small amount. And for those drivers, this is more important to them than cost. In conclusion, what fuel should you use for your car? At minimum, use the fuel grade required by the original car manufacturer. Where can you find that information? It's always written in your car manual. If you lost your manual, you can check either the fuel door, because it's usually written there. Or if it's not there, it's probably on the fuel cap. Or if it's not there, check the fuel gauge on your dashboard. Here's a quick cheat sheet on how gasoline works in your car. So you get to the pump, you fuel your car. The gas goes straight to the gas tank. Well, inside the tank is a fuel pump. It pumps the gas into your car's fuel line. The fuel filter filters out debris in the gas. Next, the fuel injector sprays gas into the piston cylinder. The gas gets processed in the engine, typically in a 4-stroke cycle. First, air gets sucked into the cylinder. The air and fuel mix as the piston moves downward in the cylinder. As the piston moves back up, it compresses the air and fuel mixture. Then the spark plug ignites the compressed air and fuel. This causes a combustion reaction. The liquid gas gets converted into exhaust gas, which forces the piston back down. The exhaust valves open. The exhaust gases leave the cylinder, travel through the exhaust pipe, through the catalytic converter, which reduces the pollutants into less toxic substances like carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water. And then the gases pass through the muffler and into the air. Then there's gas additives. They can work to increase the octane rating of gas, inhibit corrosion, lubricate, and allow higher compression ratio for greater efficiency and power. However, some additives are harmful and are regulated or banned in some countries. Oftentimes, gas retailers treat the gas they buy with specific additives. Ever hear of top-tier detergent gasoline? In 2004, top-tier gasoline was developed to go beyond the minimum standard for detergent additives to better protect engines from carbon buildup and deposits on the intake valves. Nowadays, engines have become far more precise, operating under tighter tolerances and higher compression ratios with cleaner emissions and improved fuel economy. And that's why many big automakers, Audi, BMW, Fiat Chrysler automobiles, General Motors, Honda, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, and Volkswagens support top-tier gas. Top-tier fuel must maintain levels of detergent additives that result in a higher standard of engine cleanliness and performance as compared to the EPA minimum requirement. Also, it can't contain metal additives. Let's talk about ethanol. Ethanol is an alternative alcohol fuel. It's made from plant materials like corn and sugar. In fact, did you know that much of the corn grown in the U.S. isn't eaten, popped, or creamed? Some of it is turned into ethanol. It's added to gasoline because it's a cost-effective way to raise the octane rating of gas. Also, ethanol burns cleanly, so it's also a way to help reduce emissions. Ethanol can be burned in a gasoline engine, but it's less than ideal compared to gasoline. Reason is, it has less chemical energy than diesel or regular gasoline. But since ethanol comes from renewable sources, it makes a lot of sense to use as much of it as we can. Ever see the badge for E85 and wonder what that is? E85 is a blend of 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline. It's designed for use in flex fuel vehicles, which can use both gasoline or a mixture of gasoline and ethanol. Well, what happens if you actually put E85 in a non-flex fuel vehicle? Well, your car may run poorly and a check engine light might turn on, but it shouldn't cause major damage to your car. Just be sure to add regular gasoline to the tank when you can to further dilute the ethanol. While 85% ethanol is a bit high use for normal gasoline cars, a more conservative ratio can help stretch gasoline supplies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. In fact, that's why at most regular gas stations these days, you might notice a pump with a sticker that says something like, may contain up to 10% ethanol, or a blue pump up with a blend of 25%, 30%, or 35% ethanol. These fuels work just fine in most modern cars built after 2002, and that's why we see a bit of ethanol in virtually all gasoline nowadays. You should check your owner's manual or speak to one of the service advisors if you're unsure. Did you know that the modern cooling system hasn't changed all that much from the systems of 100 years ago? Of course, modern ones are more reliable and efficient, but the basic system still consists of liquid coolant that circulates through the engine and out of the radiator to be cooled by the airstream coming through the front grille of your car. Let's start by seeing what the cooling system does. Did you know that about 70% of the energy in gasoline gets converted to heat? Most people think the cooling system's job is just to remove the heat and prevent the engine from overheating. Now that is true, but it's more than that. It also works to maintain sufficient heat so that your engine can perform optimally. It's really a balancing act. That's because if a running engine gets cooled too much, then it becomes less efficient, its components will wear out faster, and the engine will emit more pollutants. The cooling system also allows the engine to heat up as quickly as possible and then maintains a constant operating temperature of the engine. There are two types of cooling systems found in motor vehicles: liquid-cooled and air-cooled. Air-cooled engines can usually be found in some older cars, like the original Volkswagen Beetle, the Chevrolet Corvair, and a few others. In air-cooled systems, instead of circulating fluid through the engine block is covered in aluminum fins that conduct heat away from the cylinder. A powerful fan forces air over these fins, which cools the engine by transferring the heat to the air. But nowadays, most modern cars and trucks with internal combustion engines use the liquid-cooled method. A fluid circulates through pipes and passageways inside the engine. As this liquid passes through the hot engine, it absorbs heat, thereby cooling the engine. After the fluid leaves the engine, it passes through a heat exchanger or radiator, which transfers the heat from the fluid to the air blowing through the exchanger. What about electric cars? Electric motors operate under a whole different set of rules than internal combustion engines. Heat isn't as critical for the electric motor. An EV's motor can reach 200 degrees Fahrenheit, yet still operate with no problems at all. But batteries are a whole different story. An EV's battery operating temperature for optimal use is between 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If it falls below 40 degrees or above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, then the EV's range decreases, and it can lead to battery damage and shorten battery pack life. Hence, the need for a cooling system to keep the batteries within their ideal temperature range. A few EVs use air cooling. For example, the Nissan Leaf uses an air cooling method to cool its batteries. But most EVs, like Tesla for example, use liquid cooling systems, usually within an ethylene glycol coolant. The BMW i3 uses refrigerant instead of coolant in their system. There are two types of liquid cooling systems in EVs. There is the indirect liquid cooling system, which parallels the liquid cooling you see in an internal combustion engine, except in an EV, the focus is to cool the battery, not the motor. Then there's the direct cooling system, where the battery cells are submerged in the coolant. But this method isn't used by most car makers yet because it's still in development. The maintenance intervals for EV cooling systems differ from EV maker to EV maker. For example, it's recommended the Chevrolet Bolt get a flush every 150,000 miles. Contrast that to the Tesla, who doesn't want owners serving their cooling systems at all. The owner's manual for the Tesla Model 3 states that the battery coolant doesn't need to be replaced for the life of the EV under most circumstances. If you open the coolant cap, resulting in damage, they won't cover it under warranty. In fact, the Tesla cooling system is sealed, and the EV will notify the owner if the cooling system needs servicing. So basically, they're saying don't touch it and only take it to the dealer when it tells you to. In some EVs, the cabin cooling system helps speed up fast charging. The air conditioning system that keeps passengers cool does the same for the battery pack. In other words, the AC is for cabin comfort, and it also helps keep the battery cool and makes the fast charge even faster. The cooling system regulates the temperature of both the cabin and the battery pack. But let's return to the internal combustion engine. Want to know how overheating damages your car? Well, overheating can burn and melt holes through the top of the engine pistons. It can damage the seals between the cylinder head and engine. Overheating can seize your engine, meaning the electronics in your car will still work, but the engine itself won't even turn over. Instead, you'll hear a knocking or clunking sound. Overheating can also crack your engine block. It's a very, very expensive repair cost. So now you can see why it's good to care and maintain your cooling system regularly to prevent these horrible problems from happening in the first place. But how do you know if your cooling system is failing? What are some common signs? Well, a normal operating temperature for most cars is between 195 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. If your temperature gauge is reading higher than normal, or if the needle is in the red zone, then it means your car is overheating. Especially if it happens more than once, it could mean your water pump might be failing, the head gasket might be worn out, or you could have a coolant leak, or your radiator may be clogged. It could be a bad thermostat too. You should get it addressed as soon as possible to prevent the problem from escalating into more serious damage. Another common sign is decrease in fuel economy. Of course, that could be caused by many different things. One of them could be a failing cooling system. If your heater isn't working the way it should, it could be a sign of a bad radiator. If your radiator is leaking or clogged up, you won't get the heat you expect. Or sometimes it can be due to a bad thermostat. Some people know how to check the coolant level in their radiator, but always remember to do it only when the engine is cold. That's because heat and pressure build up in the radiator, so it's extremely dangerous to remove the cap when everything is still hot. In addition to checking the coolant level, you'll want to also check its color, consistency, and smell. If your coolant is dark, dirty, and has a burnt, sweet smell, it means the coolant is old and has become corrosive. Time to flush and replace the coolant. Coolant should be translucent and have a bright yellow or green color. Sometimes it can be pink or red. Another warning sign is steam coming from under your hood. And of course, if you see warning lights on your dashboard, you should take your car to the shop to get it checked out. Okay, now let's address some common questions and myths. For example, some people believe that the coolant doesn't need to be flushed, just topped up. But the truth is, the coolant, like motor oil or any other fluid in your car, will degrade over time. If it doesn't get serviced, old or broken down coolant can cause engine wear and corrosion. A flush doesn't just remove the old coolant. It also removes the built-up contaminants, including rust deposits and debris. It also thoroughly cleans out the cooling system with detergent and protective conditioner. And remember, it's important to fill your system with high-quality coolant to protect your car against corrosion, damage, and freezing in the winter. A common question is, can I use water as a coolant? Now, water can serve as a coolant with regards to heat conduction. It actually conducts heat better than antifreeze. But I don't advise using it as a coolant because it lacks corrosion inhibitors and water pump lubricants. If you don't believe me and you're using water as a coolant, well, that's your decision. But eventually your hoses and pipes will rust and corrode and you'll face serious repair costs later on. And if you live in an area where it freezes and you forget to put antifreeze in, it will crack your engine as it turns to ice. Another myth is that small drops of coolant out of your car isn't a big issue, but actually it's not true. First of all, federal and state laws mandate that you can't dump antifreeze and other hazardous materials into surface waters. Antifreeze is very poisonous and can harm pets and children. But it's not only about preventing a safety and environmental hazard, also that a leaking radiator will eventually cause failure of your cooling system. Here's why. If your radiator is leaking, well, eventually it can split open. That means the rest of your coolant will dump out quickly. Or if the leak is in the hose will blow out. It's wiser and cheaper to address a leak sooner than later. Generally, as soon as you notice it. Otherwise, you'll end up spending more time and money later to fix the issue after it escalates into a bigger and more expensive problem like a blown head gasket. So what should you do if your car's overheating? First, kill the AC and crank up the heat. It might sound counterintuitive, especially if it's hot outside. You'll have to roll the windows down so you don't bake. But it does work to keep the engine cool because the heater transfers heat from the engine to your cabin. It's basically just a small radiator like the radiator in front of your car, only it's inside your car. Then after turning on the heat, find a safe place to pull over and shut off the car. If you're not too familiar with your car, then you should call a friend, tow truck, or roadside assistance if you have one. In the meantime, let the engine cool down at least 15 minutes or more. Keep your eye on the temperature gauge till the needle moves back to the normal range as the engine cools. If you're familiar with cars, then you can check the coolant level. But as mentioned earlier, you should check it only after it's cooled down. Otherwise, it's dangerous to do when the car is hot. If the coolant level is low, a quick top-off could protect your engine for now until you're able to get your car to a nearby shop. But if you do drive it, watch the temperature gauge closely. And always refer to your car's owner manual for the location of the coolant tank and directions on how to add the coolant. Here's another common myth. Some people think engine coolant and antifreeze are the same. Actually, it's not. Antifreeze, usually ethylene glycol, does not freeze easily, and it also does not boil easily. Coolant is a mixture of water and antifreeze. Cars are supposed to run 50% water and 50% antifreeze. It's important to top your car up with the same engine coolant or antifreeze formulation that you used last time. That's because mixing different types of antifreeze can produce dangerous chemicals. Drain your old antifreeze coolant if you're not sure what type it is and can't match it. Don't risk it. Mixing coolants can lead to engine damage. So, as you can see, don't underestimate your engine's cooling system. It's a complex system that's necessary for the life of your engine and car. When your cooling system is working, you won't notice it. But if it fails, then for sure you'll notice it, and so will your pocketbook. If you like this episode, please share it and subscribe to my channel for more car technology and history videos. Thanks for your support.